Have you ever felt completely tangled up in red tape? Well, just imagine that feeling, but for an entire country's workforce. For decades, India's employment rules were this massive, complicated puzzle, and honestly, a lot of people saw them as a barrier to growth. But that is all changing, thanks to one of the biggest legal shakeups the country has ever seen.
Okay, so for the longest time, both employers and employees had to deal with this crazy web of 29 different central laws. I mean, some of these laws were nearly a century old. Think about that. It was confusing. They often contradicted each other. It made things a nightmare for businesses and a real challenge for workers to even figure out what their rights were.
So the big question was, how do you untangle a mess like that? How do you bring this whole system into the 21st century? The answer, it turns out, was a pretty radical idea: consolidation. And here it is. Those 29 laws have been boiled down into just 4 streamlined labor codes. The whole goal here is to modernize the system, make it simpler, more transparent, and just more effective for everyone involved. It's about boosting worker welfare and making it easier to do business. So let's break down what's inside each one. First up, the one that affects pretty much everyone's bottom line, the Code on Wages. This is all about creating one single, clear set of rules for how people get paid. Simple as that. At its heart, this code is really trying to do 2 major things. First, regulate wages and bonuses across every single type of job out there. And second, and this is a big one, it wants to establish the idea of a universal minimum wage that applies to everybody, no matter what sector they're in. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, for starters, by standardizing what wages even means, it cuts through a ton of confusion. It also pushes for a national minimum wage floor. So states can set their own minimums, sure, but they can't dip below a certain level set by the central government. And finally, it really doubles down on the rules to make sure everyone gets their paycheck on time. Okay, so that's pay covered. Now let's talk about the next piece of the puzzle, your actual physical work environment. This is where the Code on Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions, or OSH code, comes into play. And you're going to notice a theme here. Just like with wages, the big idea is simplification. This code takes a whole bunch of old separate laws about factory safety, mine safety, you name it, and merges them all into one single comprehensive rulebook for the modern workplace. And this is a really important shift. The new rules apply to a much wider range of businesses because, let's face it, work today happens everywhere, not just in factories. It also makes it super clear that safety is a shared responsibility. Employers have to provide a safe place to work, of course, but employees also have a duty to follow the safety rules. Now we get to what's probably the most talked about, most debated part of this whole overhaul, the Industrial Relations Code. This one gets right into the dynamics between management, workers, and trade unions. You can think of this code as the official rulebook for the relationship at work. It sets the guidelines for hiring and firing, it defines the powers of trade unions, and it lays out the procedures for handling conflicts like strikes or lockouts. Now check this out, because this highlights one of the most significant changes. Before, the rules for when a union could legally go on strike were different depending on the industry. The new code makes it standard across the board. A 14-day notice is required before any strike or lockout in any sector. As you can imagine, this one change has sparked a lot of conversation. On one hand, you have a clear, predictable process for everyone. But on the other hand, some argue it might make it harder for unions to react quickly when they need to. It really makes you think about how one single rule change could reshape the power dynamics in workplaces all over the country. And that brings us to the fourth and final pillar, the Code on Social Security. This is all about creating a modern safety net, one that actually reflects how people work today, and that includes the huge rise of the gig economy. The big ambition here, the real game changer, is to extend Social Security benefits. We're talking about things like pensions, medical benefits, insurance, beyond the traditional workforce. The goal is to bring informal and gig economy workers into that safety net for the very first time. So how would this actually work for, say, a delivery driver or a freelance coder? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. The platforms they work for would chip in to a central fund. The worker then registers on a national portal, and through that, they can get access to a whole range of benefits, giving them a level of protection they just never had before. Okay, so we've broken down all 4 codes. Let's zoom out for a second. What happens when you put all of these pieces together? What's the real big picture impact of this massive overhaul?
At the end of the day, these codes are trying to strike a balance with potential wins for both sides. You can see it right here. For workers, there's the promise of a wage floor, better safety, and a much wider social security net. And for employers, the big appeal is simpler legal compliance and more flexibility. The idea is to rewrite the rules of the game for everybody. But of course, writing the laws is really only step one. The real test, the real story, is how these codes are actually put into practice on the ground, across a country of over 1 billion people. Will this new framework truly build a more fair, efficient, and modern world of work? Well, that's the big question that only time will be able to answer.